Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be examining one of the preludes of Chopin. It's a famous prelude we're looking at today, number 4. And just to give you a reminder of how it goes, because you'll very likely have heard this piece before, I'll play you a few bars. If you haven't heard it before, well, it's an absolute gem, this piece. And so it goes on. So just gives you the flavour of the poetry and the rather kind of sad feelings that are coming across in this piece. But it's a beautiful piece and it's so skillfully written. We're just going to unpack it a little bit for a few minutes and see what's going on. What are these hallmarks of this terrific poetic genius of Chopin? And what's all this sadness about? Well, it's very easy to think, isn't it, that someone like Chopin was this great composer, must have been kind of rich and famous, some kind of X Factor winner of his day, maybe had this fantastic lifestyle or something. Actually, it's not altogether a terribly realistic view of how most composers lived their lives and the things they had to face. They're human beings like the rest of us, and often the music comes out of their life experience. Chopin had a terrific success in all sorts of ways, but at the same time he had a life that contained a lot of sadness. He had difficulties with relationships. Primary relationships weren't always easy for him, got quite complicated. He became ill, so he wasn't a well man, and he had to sort of fight with all that as well. And of course, he didn't actually live a very long life because, born in 1810, died in 1849, so didn't make it to his 40th birthday. So all of that at one level is a bit tragic, of course, but maybe it's part of what gives him this poetic genius, some of this outpouring of the pain of being a human being, if you like, is what's revealed in a piece like this. Now, I think there are a number of aspects of this piece that we might want to look at. Largo, so it's going at a slow tempo. Piano, espressivo is written in the score at the beginning. So we kind of know we're dealing with something quite slow, kind of quite intense. It's got a very kind of simple approach at one level. We've got a melodic line in the right hand, and we've got repeated chords in the left hand, providing an accompaniment. So the texture throughout the piece is melody and accompaniment. Very kind of simple thing that composers in the classical period did all the time. So your Mozarts and your Haydns, this was often a texture that they would work with. It doesn't sound at all like a Mozart or a Haydn though, because this has a kind of renewed intensity. It has all that romantic passion going on that comes through the melodic line, but perhaps comes even more through the harmony. And we'll have a look at that. First of all, we begin with an anacrusis. In other words, we don't begin on the first beat of the bar, we have this kind of upbeat. And what Chopin does, we're in the key of E minor, is he starts on the dominant note B. And just to make something even more of this opening, instead of just going B, E, lots of songs do that, don't they? En il climat batat, something like that, where we go dominant, tonic. Well, actually what he does is he goes dominant, dominant. So we don't get that kind of tonic resolution in the melody. And he enhances that by starting on this dominant note, going up the octave, and then repeating this upper note. So the first 3 notes become quite kind of strong in themselves, don't they? Yam padi. So the leaping octave, the repeated upper B, the upper dominant, the dotted rhythm, already we're feeling a bit of kind of tension in this thing, aren't we? Now, what I find interesting, after this opening that we've just talked about, what does he do with the melody from that point onwards? Because he starts by doing something that could easily be criticised for being a bit boring, because it goes B for 3 beats, C for 1 beat. Then he does it again. B for 3 beats, C for 1 beat. Then he does it again. What? B for 3 beats, C for 1 beat. Then he goes B for 3 beats again, and then thankfully eventually changes the note to B flat. But, you know, if somebody said to you, I want you to write a really inspiring melody, would you write this? I don't think you would. I think back to my musical education, if I'd written a melody like that and taken it along to a lesson with one of my professors, I think they'd have said, well, hang on a minute, I think you need to rethink this, you know. It's not a very exciting melody, is it? It's just got stuck on those 2 notes. Here's Chopin doing exactly that. Now, the thing is, how does he get away with that? We'll come back to what's happening in the harmony, because that's how he gets away with it. But for now, I just want to stick with this idea that he's got these 2 notes. There's 3 beat B going to a 1 beat C, repeating that over and over again. It almost sounds like Jaws, doesn't it? So anyway, there you go. But he eventually moves away from it. So when we come to the end of this first line of the score, he has the B for 3 beats, and then instead of going up to C, he comes down a semitone to B flat. So we've been going from B up a semitone to C. And just as we've really established that, he says, let's go the other way. We'll come down a semitone to B flat. And then we'll come down another semitone to A. And then what does he do? Well, A for 3 beats, up a note to B. A for 3 beats, up a note to B. A for 3 beats, up a note to B. Oh my goodness, he's doing it again. So on the second line of the score, A, B, A, B, A, B, A. Couldn't be more boring if you tried. The only thing he does to slightly vary it is when he comes to that last iteration of it, we get this rhythm where the A is anticipated and we have that dotted rhythm that we had right back at the beginning. So this dotted rhythm refers back to the dotted rhythm of the anacrusis at the start. But otherwise, we're doing the same boring old thing, alternating 2 notes. So it's not looking very promising as a melody, is it? Well, after that point, at least Chopin now gets the message and says, well, we better do something other than 2 notes. So having got to this last A, he then goes down another semitone to G sharp. And then he says, okay, time to let this melody flourish a bit. Now, I think that's a gorgeous moment in the melody because he's almost done something a bit hypnotic, isn't he? With this B, C, B, and then A, B, A. And then suddenly we have this rather beautiful line. So we have this kind of the going over to the D as an appoggiatura onto the C is a beautiful moment to express the D, isn't it? And then he has this falling 6, which is very expressive, then rising 4th, and then settles in between those 2 notes, and then repeats. So we have that A to the F sharp. He then repeats the A to the F sharp again. So we're back on this kind of repetition of notes and going back to this 3-beat thing. And then after that, he goes back to the A again, but just ornaments it. And then ornaments the F sharp again by doing this with an accented, as a sort of appoggiatura onto the F sharp. And then again, we have a moment where the melody flourishes for another bar at the end of line 3 on this score, where we have and that's a gorgeous moment, isn't it? You notice as well in this bar, the left hand stops playing, so it's just the right hand unaccompanied, this monophonic line. And we have an appoggiatura G to F sharp and then an appoggiatura C onto B. So you feel the tension, the release, the tension, the release. You also notice we go from F sharp down to C, that tritone interval is just a little bit eerie, isn't it? And then he goes to D sharp, which is implying a dominant chord, a chord 5. And then he has this sort of almost false relation thing because we've got D sharp, D natural. So that feels kind of very stark, doesn't it? But it draws attention to the D natural that then comes down the scale to B and then at the beginning of the next line, guess what he's going to do? He's going to return to this opening thing again. Oh my goodness, it's another dose of the B's and C's. So B for 3 beats, C, B for 3 beats, C, B for 3 beats, C, B, oh my goodness. But then the melody kind of flowers again, and this time we have a more extended passage of melody. So what happens here? We get this, the dotted rhythm, so that's come for the third time. So notice we had that in the anacrusis at the beginning, we had it towards the end of the second line. Here it comes again towards the end of the fourth line. And then he has a big leap up to this G. So this diminished seventh leap is kind of poignant, isn't it? And he emphasizes that by putting a turn on it. So we have this, and then a turn, which really launches you up to that top G, doesn't it? It's a wonderful moment. And then the dotted rhythm comes again, and we're back to E, and now we're going to do another diminished seventh up there, very poignant interval. Then he comes down again, and then he uses the D sharp as an appoggiatura onto the E, and then releases the tension a little bit by having 3 notes that all belong to a tonic chord. Then he has an appoggiatura D onto C, and then he tucks in this little triplet. Just gives us a little bit of kind of rhythmic energy, doesn't he? And then we're getting stuck again with 2 notes because he goes F sharp A, F sharp A, F sharp. So you get this, and then a little ornament just to vary it. But this idea of this repeated 2 note thing again. And then he just tucks in the dotted rhythm again, using the E at the end of this line as an anticipatory note for the next note. So we have this E, E, and then what does he do on the last line? Guess what? E for 3 beats up to F sharp, E for 3 beats up to F sharp, E. So we're back on this boring 2 note thing again. And then at the end, he just finishes off going E, D sharp, E. Nothing very exciting about that. At one level, this is a terrific compositional exercise in how do you just take 2 notes, keep alternating them, and not end up with a boring piece. And when is the moment at which you've exhausted this repetition thing of 2 notes and you have to do something like add a dotted rhythm, add a little ornament, or let the whole melody suddenly flourish into a kind of outburst of a moment, which is what he's doing at this point at the end of line 3. And then again in a more extended way at the end of line 4 going into line 5. Apart from that, the melody actually is highly memorable, but not actually particularly exciting in its design. So you sort of think, yeah, actually, this is a beautiful tune, but then you realise that actually it's quite a limited tune, isn't it? So what's going on in the harmony underneath all of that? Well, some of the harmony is perfectly obvious and plain. So if we go back to the first bar, well, we're in the key of E minor. The left hand plays the first inversion chord of E minor 8 times. So that's getting a bit stuck like our melody. But what does he do then? He does this in the second bar. So really, we've got a suspension, haven't we? Because the E at the top of the left hand is a 7/6 suspension, really. The E is really going down to D sharp if we're in the key of E minor. What's interesting is that he doesn't call this D sharp, he calls it E flat. Why does he do that? Because then in the next bar he can say, well, if I call that E flat, I can sort of use this chord, which is a sort of dominant 7th in the key of B flat. So it's really giving us a bit of colour that we're not expecting. So E minor, then going on to a sort of chord 5 with a 7/6 suspension. But instead of calling it D sharp, call it E flat, so we can then take the bass down. F sharp in the bass to F natural. Oh, wonderful colour, isn't it? And then you think, okay, that's a dominant 7th in B flat, but it isn't, because we've got B natural in the right hand. So really, this chord is more of a French 6. It's really, technically speaking, a sort of French 6 in A minor, isn't it? But with that slightly enharmonic alteration. So instead of D sharp, we've got E flat. So it's definitely hinting at a French sixth there, isn't it? And then we move on from there to a D minor chord, which again we're not expecting. Then chromatic movement again, because A in the middle of the chord goes to G sharp. So that's sounding a bit like a diminished seventh chord, isn't it? But that C in the right hand is adding dissonance because it's effectively an upper auxiliary note, isn't it? And then we come to a 5-7 chord, but this is really a 5-7 in the key of A major or A minor, but it doesn't resolve to A minor or to A major. It goes on to have a G natural, so more chromatic movement. G sharp in the tenor goes to G natural in the tenor. Oh, so this is what's making it really poignant now, isn't it? And then at the end of that bar, we have got a diminished seventh. It's really a diminished seventh in the key of D now. So we're going all over the place, aren't we? Lots of semitone movement, you know, the B to the B natural in the tune, D to C sharp in the tenor. The tenor goes on chromatically from D to C sharp to C natural, as is the melody going from B to B flat to A. So all the semitone stuff going on. And then we get a suspension in the bass. E, and it goes on for a long time before it resolves. So you've got this suspension tension in the bass there as well, haven't you? Also kind of implying a slightly different chord. You know, when you get to this chord, you're thinking, well, it's a kind of, you know, A minor 7, or it's really a 2-7 in E minor, isn't it? In an inversion. So yeah, 2-7 in its last inversion. Going to a diminished seventh again, upper auxiliary, going to a dominant seventh, this time in the key of G, and then the tenor going from F sharp to F natural as we come into the last bar of the second line, and then moving down to a diminished seventh in the key of A minor. Do you see what's happening with the harmony? It's going all over the landscape. Lots of chromatic harmony, lots of suspensions, lots of playing with enharmonics, lots of suggestions of other keys that don't always kind of quite come to pass, but a huge amount of chromatic movement. Now this enables Chopin to get away with alternating these two notes in the melody, because all of this is going on underneath the melody, but it's subtle because the melody is our prime focus. We're just aware that all these other things are going on underneath, and he carries on doing this. Okay, well then the melody kind of comes to life at the beginning of the third bar. We talked about how that happens. There's a 7-6 in the left hand, this B going to A, so 7-6 suspension there, but then A minor with appoggiatura in the right hand. Then another 4-3 suspension in the middle of the left hand, 4-3 onto a dominant seventh, but doesn't resolve as we might expect. It goes back to this, which is that kind of 2-7 thing again, 4-5-7 again, back to that 2-7. And then back to 5 with an appoggiatura. And of course that really weeps, doesn't it? That G appoggiatura, partly because it's implying a dominant 13th, as well as being an appoggiatura on there. And then there's this wonderful moment where the left hand just stops. We've had repeated quavers, repeated eighth notes from the beginning, and then the left hand stops and we just have this monophonic thing in the right hand with the triplet. Notice that triplet, by the way, comes there, doesn't it? And it comes back later on. So again, just kind of using the same ideas in more than one place. And that allows us to breathe before we then start the next line with a kind of return to the opening. So we're now reliving a lot of this that we had at the beginning. So this is all the same, but here, notice, we suddenly got F natural in the bass. Up here we had F sharp in the bass, down here it's F natural. Okay, so then we've got A flat. Oh, what's going on here? We're kind of becoming more intense. Notice all this chromatic movement that's all going on all over the place. There's so much chromatic movement going on in more parts. So he's intensified this idea of chromatic progression. appoggiatura onto this diminished seventh. Diminished seventh, continuing chromatic alteration again, semitone movement, comes to this climax forte, and then we get this wonderful chord. I mean, it's just terrific tension, isn't it? And notice it's all minor thirds, it's diminished seventh territory. And then we have this multiple appoggiatura onto this. We've got D sharp going to E, F sharp going to E, D sharp going to E. So it's multiple appoggiatura onto E minor, appoggiatura onto A minor, a chord 4, kind of going to a 2-7. And then what we think is going to be a 4-3 suspension, but it isn't. It's going back to that 2-7 chord. And then we think this is going to be a 4 of a 4-3, but it isn't. It's going back here. So a kind of suspension that doesn't resolve. And then it comes again and you think, oh, well, it didn't resolve a couple of times before, so it won't now, but this time it does. Because E in the tenor now goes down to D sharp. And our dotted note, this could be the end of the piece, but he doesn't do that. Instead of having a perfect cadence, he has an interrupted cadence, and that allows him to continue into kind of the closing stages. Then you get this B flat. Now that's an interesting thing. If it were an A sharp, it would be an Italian 6. So the B flat suggests the dominant 7th in F or something, but it's not that. He's just messing about with the enharmonics again. The 2/7's back, and then we've got this, what we think is going to be another suspension. It sort of is, but we go to E major, then to E minor. So he's carrying on with the semitone thing. Then the bass goes down another semitone to B flat. So you see how these kind of semitone moves going all the time. And then he has a very straightforward last cadence. The thickest bit of the texture, the slowest moving bit, having had this poignant rest with a pause on it. Then he just does this 4 to 3 over the dominant chord, and then a tonic chord finished. So you kind of really feel this poetry in the music, don't you? How he takes this very simple, one might even say slightly irritating melodic idea of 2 notes, but you see how the harmony absolutely brings the piece to life, and how that melodic design is so skillful in the way that all this fits together. So it's a wonderful prelude, very famous prelude of Chopin, but an amazing work of genius, just in a handful of bars, how Chopin achieves all of that poetry and all of that romantic intensity, all of that kind of darkness, if you like, but at the same time, all that beauty. Does it reflect all those challenges he had in his own life? Surely it does, because how might it be anything else? But there we are. That's Chopin's beautiful prelude number 4 in E minor. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. You'll find plenty of courses there, including analysis courses, where we kind of go into depth in the way that we've done in this video, but we take it much further. So you might find that a helpful thing. But lots of other courses, theory, oral, orchestration. If you want to find something, have a look, it's probably there. Also, have a look at Maestros while you're on the homepage and find out how to join our global musical community, where you can be in contact with other musicians on the same journey. And if you join as a level 2 or level 3 member, you can have access to our monthly live streams, lots of teaching input from me, lots of chance to ask questions. We can converse with each other through the live chat. And at level 3, you can submit your own performances, your own compositions, your own harmony exercises, whatever you want to do, where you can also get one-to-one feedback from me, evaluation, and we share those in the group again. Everybody gets to hear everybody's input and see the scores and so on, and we can have some really productive, positive discussion. It's very supportive stuff, and the people who join those groups say how much they value those monthly live streams in particular. Lots of other perks as well. It's all explained on the website. Anyway, take a look, see what's there for you. www.mmcourses.co.uk.